The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch their flights. 17-year-old Daniel sat quietly in the corner of Gate 23, his worn backpack clutched tightly on his lap. Inside that bag was everything he owned now. 3 changes of clothes, his mother's favorite scarf that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and a folder containing his high school transcripts with straight A's that seemed meaningless now. 2 months ago, Daniel's world had been completely different. His mom was alive, working double shifts at the diner to support them. They had their small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was home. Then cancer came like a thief in the night, and within 8 weeks, she was gone. The medical bills consumed everything. The apartment had to go, and now Daniel was heading to New York to live with his Aunt Patricia, a woman he'd only met twice in his life. The announcement crackled through the speakers. Flight 447 to New York was now boarding. Daniel stood up slowly, joining the line of passengers. He handed his ticket to the gate agent, who barely glanced at him before waving him through. As he walked down the jet bridge, his heart felt heavier with each step. He was leaving behind everything familiar, everyone he knew, and heading into complete uncertainty. Inside the plane, Daniel found his seat in economy. Row 34, middle seat. He squeezed past a businessman already asleep against the window and settled into his spot. The plane gradually filled with passengers. Crying babies, excited tourists with cameras, tired business travelers, tapping on laptops. Daniel pulled out an old medical textbook he'd borrowed from his school library. For the past year, while his mom was sick, he'd taught himself everything he could about medicine. He'd dreamed of becoming a doctor someday, but that dream seemed impossible now. Still, reading helped him feel close to her somehow. The plane pushed back from the gate. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration, while most passengers ignored them, scrolling through their phones for those final moments before airplane mode. Daniel watched carefully, noting where the emergency exits were, where the first aid kits were stored. His mom had always taught him to pay attention to details. "You never know when information might save a life," she used to say. As the plane climbed into the sky, Daniel tried to focus on his book, but his mind kept wandering. What would life be like in New York? His aunt had made it clear on the phone that she didn't have much space. He'd be sleeping on her couch in a tiny apartment in Queens. She'd said she could help him finish his senior year at the local high school, but after that, he was on his own. College seemed like a fantasy now. He'd probably have to get a full-time job just to help with rent. 2 hours into the flight, the plane had reached cruising altitude. Most passengers were either sleeping or watching movies on their screens. Daniel had gotten up once to use the bathroom and noticed the first-class section at the front. Spacious seats that looked more like recliners. Actual meals being served on real plates. Passengers sipping wine from actual glasses. In one of those premium seats, he'd seen an elderly woman with perfectly styled silver hair, laughing at something her husband was saying. They looked so comfortable, so secure in their world. Daniel wondered what that felt like, to not worry about money, to just exist without constant anxiety. He returned to his cramped middle seat and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled out his textbook again, reviewing a chapter on emergency medical responses. His mom had been so proud when he'd started learning this stuff. She'd called him "my little doctor," even when she was too weak to get out of bed. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the front of the plane. Daniel's head snapped up. A flight attendant was rushing down the aisle, her face pale with worry. "Is there a doctor on board?" She called out urgently. "We have a medical emergency." "Is anyone here a doctor?" The cabin fell silent. Passengers looked around at each other nervously. The flight attendant repeated her question more desperately this time. No one responded. Daniel's heart began to pound. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his legs shaky. "What's happening?" he asked the flight attendant as she rushed past. "A passenger in first class?" She collapsed. "We need medical help now," the attendant said, barely stopping. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He pushed past passengers and hurried toward first class. The flight attendant tried to stop him. Sir, you need to return to your seat. I can help, Daniel said firmly. I know emergency medical procedures. The attendant looked skeptical. She saw a skinny teenager in a wrinkled t-shirt and old sneakers. But another flight attendant called out desperately from first class, and there was no time to argue. Fine, come on, but if you can't help, you need to step back immediately. In first class, Daniel saw the elderly woman he'd noticed earlier. She was slumped in her seat, her face ghostly white, her lips starting to turn blue. Her husband, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, was holding her hand, his own hands trembling. Catherine, please, stay with me, he was saying, his voice breaking. Daniel knelt beside the woman. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. This was exactly like the scenarios he'd studied in his textbook. He'd read about this dozens of times while sitting in his mom's hospital room. The woman's breathing was shallow and raspy. Her throat was swelling. Small red hives were spreading across her neck. She's having an allergic reaction, Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. Anaphylactic shock. Her airway is closing. We need an EpiPen right now, or she won't make it. The flight attendants looked at each other in panic. The husband stared at Daniel. Who are you? Are you a doctor? No, sir, but I know what I'm seeing. Does she have any allergies? Shellfish, the husband said quickly. But she didn't eat anything with shellfish. Cross-contamination in the meal preparation, Daniel said. It happens. We need epinephrine now. Does anyone have an EpiPen? The lead flight attendant made an announcement over the intercom, asking if any passenger had an EpiPen. Precious seconds ticked by. The woman's breathing became more labored. Her eyes were starting to close. Her husband was crying now, gripping her hand. Daniel tilted her head back slightly, trying to keep her airway as open as possible. He placed 2 fingers on her neck, feeling for her pulse. It was there, but weak and racing. Stay with us, he whispered. Come on, stay with us. A business traveler from 3 rows back came running forward, holding an EpiPen. My son has allergies. I always carry one. Here. Daniel took it with shaking hands. He'd never actually done this before. He'd only read about it, watched videos online, but there was no choice. He pulled off the cap, positioned it against the woman's thigh, and pressed hard. The device clicked. The medication injected. He held it there for 10 seconds, counting in his head just like the book said. For a moment, nothing happened. The cabin was completely silent. Everyone was holding their breath. The husband was praying under his breath. Then slowly, the woman gasped. Her eyes fluttered open. Color began returning to her face. Her breathing, while still labored, was improving. Ah! There we go, Daniel said softly, relief flooding through him. You're okay. You're going to be okay. The pilot announced they were making an emergency landing in Denver. The woman, Catherine, managed to squeeze Daniel's hand weakly. Her husband looked at Daniel with tears streaming down his face. You saved her life, he said, his voice hoarse. You saved my wife's life. Who are you? Daniel sat back on his heels, suddenly exhausted. Just a passenger, he said quietly. Just someone who paid attention. 15 minutes later, the plane touched down in Denver. Paramedics rushed on board and took over Catherine's care. They praised Daniel's quick response, confirming that without immediate treatment, she wouldn't have survived until landing. As they wheeled her off the plane, her husband stopped and turned back to Daniel. What's your name, son? Daniel, sir. The man pulled out a business card and pressed it into Daniel's hand. Richard Westbrook. I won't forget what you did today. I'll find you. I promise you that. Then he was gone, following his wife to the ambulance. Daniel stood there in the empty first-class cabin, holding the business card, not knowing that this single moment of courage had just changed the entire trajectory of his life. 2 weeks had passed since the emergency landing in Denver. Daniel tried not to think about it much. After all, what was there to think about? He'd helped someone, the plane eventually took off again, and he'd arrived in New York 6 hours late. His Aunt Patricia had been annoyed about waiting at the airport, complaining about the parking fees the whole drive to Queens. Life in New York was exactly as difficult as Daniel had feared. Maybe worse. His aunt's apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom in a building where the elevator only worked half the time. True to her word, she'd set up the couch for him with a thin blanket and a flat pillow. The apartment walls were so thin he could hear every conversation from the neighbors, every footstep from upstairs, every siren from the street below. Patricia worked as a receptionist at a dental office and made clear from day one that Daniel needed to contribute. "I'm doing you a favor here," she'd said the first morning. "I can't afford to feed another mouth for free. You're 17, almost an adult. Time to step up." So Daniel found a job within 3 days. The night shift at a 24-hour convenience store, 6 blocks away. $10 an hour, 6 nights a week, from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. He'd finish his shift, walk back to the apartment, change clothes, and head straight to his new high school. Classes ran from 8:30 to 3. Then he'd come home, try to sleep for a few hours, wake up, and do it all over again. He was exhausted all the time. His eyes burned constantly. In his old school back in California, he'd been a Strata student, president of the science club, on track for valedictorian. Here, he was just trying to stay awake during class. His teachers barely noticed him. He was just another transfer student in an overcrowded public school, where half the kids seemed as tired and defeated as he felt. The business card from Richard Westbrook sat in his wallet. Daniel had looked up the name online one night during a slow shift at the store. Richard Westbrook wasn't just wealthy. He was billionaire wealthy. Real estate empire, dozens of properties, buildings with his name on them. Daniel had stared at the website for a long time, looking at photos of gleaming office towers and luxury hotels, then looked around at the fluorescent lights of the convenience store and laughed bitterly. What was he thinking? People like Richard Westbrook didn't actually follow up with random teenagers. That promise on the plane was just something you say in emotional moments. It didn't mean anything. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after arriving in New York, Daniel was walking home from school. His backpack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He'd gotten a C- on a math test that morning, the first C of his entire life. He was too tired to care. All he wanted was to collapse on that uncomfortable couch and sleep for a few hours before his shift. He turned the corner onto his aunt's street and stopped dead. Parked in front of the building was a black luxury sedan that probably cost more than his aunt made in 5 years. A driver in a suit stood beside it. Several neighbors were gathered on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing. Daniel's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Had something happened to his aunt? He rushed forward, taking the stairs 2 at a time since the elevator was broken again. He burst through the apartment door and froze. Richard Westbrook was sitting on his aunt's worn couch. He looked completely out of place in his tailored suit, surrounded by the apartment's shabby furniture and peeling wallpaper. Aunt Patricia was fluttering around nervously, offering him coffee in a chipped mug. Daniel Richard stood up immediately when he saw him. "Thank God. I've been trying to find you for 2 weeks. Daniel couldn't speak. His mind was racing. Why was this man here? How did he find him? Richard smiled gently. You didn't make it easy. You gave me your first name only, and there were 247 passengers on that flight. But I have good investigators. Catherine is doing wonderfully, by the way. The doctor said if you hadn't acted so quickly, she wouldn't have made it. You saved my wife's life." Aunt Patricia was staring between them with wide eyes. "Daniel, you never told me any of this. You saved someone's life." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," Richard said firmly. "You did what almost no one would do. You're 17 years old, and you had the knowledge, the courage, and the clarity of mind to act when trained flight attendants were panicking. Catherine and I have talked about nothing else. We want to thank you properly." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. Daniel watched as Richard uncapped an expensive pen. "Tell me what you need. What do you want? College tuition? A car? Name your price. Whatever it is, it's yours." The room went silent. Aunt Patricia's eyes went huge. Daniel could practically see her mentally calculating bills, rent, the credit card debt she'd mentioned several times. His own mind went to obvious places. With enough money, he could get his own apartment. He He could quit the exhausting night job. He could focus on school, maybe actually have a shot at college. He could stop feeling like a burden. Richard held the pen over the check, waiting. 50,000? 100,000? More? What would change your life? Daniel stared at that blank check. It would be so easy. Just name a number. He thought about his mother, working herself to death at that diner for tips. He thought about the medical bills that had consumed everything she'd ever saved. He thought about how money had always been the wall between them and a better life. But then he thought about something else. He thought about those medical textbooks he'd studied, not because anyone made him, but because he wanted to understand. He thought about the moment on the plane when he'd actually helped someone, when all that knowledge became real and meaningful. He thought about his mother's voice. Education is the only thing no one can take from you, she used to say. Opportunities matter more than handouts. Daniel took a deep breath and did something that made his aunt gasp out loud. He pushed the check away. I don't want money, he said quietly. Richard's eyebrows shot up. You don't want money? No, sir. Daniel's voice grew stronger. Money would help right now, today. But it would run out eventually. I'd spend it, and then I'd be right back where I started. Maybe worse, because I'd know what I'd lost. Aunt Patricia made a strangled sound. Daniel, what are you doing? But Daniel kept his eyes on Richard. You asked what would change my life. Money won't change my life. It'll just delay my problems. What I need is a chance. A real chance to prove myself. Richard leaned forward, genuinely interested now. What kind of chance? A job at your company. Any job at all? I don't care if it's cleaning floors or delivering mail. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need someone to give me an opportunity to show what I can do. Daniel's hands were shaking, but his voice stayed steady. I want to earn my way, not have it given to me. Because if I earn it, no one can ever take it away. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Aunt Patricia looked like she might faint. Richard stared at Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. Then, slowly, Richard smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a smile of genuine surprise and respect. Do you know how many people I've made that offer to over the years? Dozens, CEOs, politicians, business partners. Every single one of them took the money. Every single one. He stood up and walked over to Daniel. You're the first person who's ever asked me for something harder than money. He extended his hand. Daniel shook it, confused. You have a job, Richard said. Starting Monday. I'll have my assistant call you with the details. You'll begin in our mailroom at Westbrook Enterprises. The salary is modest, $35,000 a year. The hours are normal business hours, so you can finish your senior year. And Daniel, Richard's expression turned serious. I'm going to hold you to your promise. You said you'll work harder than anyone I've ever hired. I'm going to make sure you get the chance to prove that. After Richard left, Aunt Patricia exploded. Are you insane? He was going to give you money. Real money. And you asked for a mailroom job? But Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt hope. Not the fragile hope that comes from luck or charity, but the solid hope that comes from opportunity. He had a chance now. A real chance. And he wasn't going to waste it. That night at the convenience store. During his last shift before quitting, Daniel pulled out his phone and looked at Westbrook Enterprises' website again. This time, he wasn't looking at it as an impossible dream. He was looking at it as his future. Somewhere in one of those buildings, there was a mailroom with his name on it. And from that mailroom, Daniel was going to climb. Not because someone gave him a shortcut, but because he was going to earn every single step. The real work was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Daniel's hands shake as he buttoned his only dress shirt. He'd bought it at a thrift store over the weekend, $5, pressed it carefully the night before. His aunt had barely spoken to him since Richard's visit. Still furious that he'd turned down what she called life-changing money. But Daniel knew what he was doing. At least he hoped he did. The Westbrook Enterprises building stood 53 stories tall in Midtown Manhattan. all glass and steel, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. Daniel stood on the sidewalk across the street for a full minute, just staring up at it. Somewhere inside that building was a mailroom. His mailroom. He took a deep breath and crossed the street. Security checked his ID. A woman from Human Resources met him in the lobby, barely making eye contact as she handed him a badge and a company handbook. Mailroom is in the basement. Take the service elevator. Your supervisor is Mr. Chen. Don't be late. Then she was gone, heels clicking across the marble floor. The basement was a different world from the gleaming lobby. Concrete floors, flickering fluorescent lights, the constant hum of machinery. The mailroom was a large space filled with sorting tables, metal carts overflowing with packages, and stacks of boxes that reached the ceiling. For other workers were already there, all of them at least 10 years older than Daniel. Mr. Chen was a short man with tired eyes and coffee stains on his shirt. He looked Daniel up and down with obvious skepticism. "You're the kid, huh? The one Westbrook personally hired." His tone made it clear what he thought about that. "Listen, I don't care whose charity case you are. Down here, you work like everyone else, or you're gone. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "Don't call me sir. I'm not management anymore, just stuck babysitting the mailroom." He thrust a card at Daniel. "Deliveries for floors 12 through 20. Names are on the packages. Don't lose anything, don't be slow, and don't bother the executives. Go." The other workers snickered as Daniel wheeled the heavy cart toward the elevator. He heard one of them whisper, "Give him a week before he quits." Daniel didn't quit. Not that first week, not that first month. Every morning he arrived an hour early. Every evening he stayed an hour late. While the other mailroom workers did the bare minimum, delivering packages and leaving, Daniel did something different. He paid attention. He memorized names. Not just the executives, but the assistants, the security guards, the cleaning staff. He learned the building's layout like he was studying for a test, knowing which departments were on which floors, understanding the flow of communication between them. When he delivered mail, he didn't just drop it and leave. He noticed things. He listened. After 2 months, Daniel started seeing patterns. Packages frequently went to the wrong departments because the labels were confusing. Important documents got delayed because the routing system was outdated. There was no tracking, so when something went missing, it took days to figure out where it went. The whole operation was inefficient. Running on procedures that probably hadn't changed in 20 years, Daniel spent his nights after school researching. He taught himself basic coding through free online courses, the same way he'd taught himself emergency medicine. He designed a simple tracking system on his laptop, testing it with his own deliveries. Every package got a number. Every stop got logged. If something went missing, he could trace its exact path. The other mailroom workers made fun of him constantly. "Look at the professor," they'd joke. "Too good for regular work." They called him Westbrook's pet and deliberately gave him the worst assignments. The heaviest loads, the most difficult deliveries. Daniel never complained. He just worked harder. 3 months in, Catherine Westbrook visited the office. Daniel was sorting packages when he heard her voice and looked up. She was walking through the basement with her assistant, heading toward the parking garage. She looked healthy now, vibrant, completely recovered. "Daniel." She stopped, her face lighting up with recognition. "Is that really you?" Daniel set down the package he was holding. "Mrs. Westbrook, it's good to see you looking so well." Catherine came over, ignoring her assistant's impatient hovering. She looked around the mailroom, taking in the concrete walls and cramped space. "Richard told me you were working here, but I didn't quite believe it." "You turned down his money to sort mail?" "I turned down money to get a chance," Daniel corrected gently. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "You're exactly as remarkable as I thought you were. How are things going?" Before Daniel could answer, Mr. Chen appeared, nervous at seeing a Westbrook in his domain. "Mrs. Westbrook, is everything all right?" "Is there a problem?" "No problem at all," Catherine said warmly. "Just saying hello to a friend." She turned back to Daniel. "I hope you'll come to dinner sometime. Richard and I would love to hear how you're settling in." After she left, the other workers stared at Daniel with a mixture of jealousy and confusion. Mr. Chen pulled him aside. You know the Westbrooks personally? I helped Mrs. Westbrook once, Daniel said simply. That's all. But things changed after that visit. Mr. Chen started giving him slightly better assignments. The other workers stopped their constant mockery, though they didn't exactly become friendly. And Daniel kept working, kept learning, kept building his tracking system. One Friday afternoon, disaster struck. A package containing contracts for a major deal had gone missing. The executive vice president was having a meltdown on the phone with Mr. Chen. Those contracts are worth millions. They needed to be delivered to the legal department 2 days ago. Where are they? Mr. Chen was panicking, searching through piles of unsorted mail, his face red with stress. We'll find them, I promise. We're looking everywhere. Daniel was across the room but heard everything. He pulled up his laptop and checked his personal tracking system. He'd been logging every package he touched for 3 months now, even though it wasn't official. He typed in the date the package should have arrived. Mr. Chen, Daniel called out. I think I can help. Mr. Chen turned, desperate enough to listen.
What?
Daniel showed him the laptop screen. I've been tracking packages. If it came through here, I'll have a record. What was the sender's name? 10 minutes later, Daniel had traced the package's exact route. It had been resorted to the 19th floor instead of the 20th. A simple mistake, but one that had cost 2 days of panic. Daniel personally went and retrieved it, delivering it to the frantic executive with 15 minutes to spare before the deadline. The executive stared at him. How did you find this so fast? I built a tracking system, Daniel explained. It's basic right now, but it works. Every package gets logged, every delivery gets recorded. If something goes missing, we can trace it in minutes instead of days. Can I see this system? Daniel showed him the laptop. The executive looked at it for a long time, then asked questions. Detailed questions about how it worked, how it could scale, what it would take to implement company-wide. When he was done, he looked at Daniel with new eyes. What's your name? Daniel, sir? Well, Daniel, I'm going to be talking to some people about this. Don't go anywhere. Mr. Chen heard about it within the hour and pulled Daniel aside, furious. You went over my head. You showed an executive your little project without telling me first? I was just trying to help find the package, Daniel protested. You're trying to make me look bad? Make yourself look good. I've been managing this mailroom for 8 years. I don't need some teenager telling me how to do my job. The hostility in the mailroom became unbearable after that. The other workers completely froze Daniel out. His cart would mysteriously go missing. Packages assigned to him would disappear from his route. Someone spilled coffee on his laptop, destroying 3 months of work. When Daniel tried to explain what was happening to Mr. Chen, he was told he was being paranoid and needed to focus on his actual work instead of playing computer games. Daniel came home exhausted and discouraged. Maybe his aunt had been right. Maybe he should have just taken the money. At least then, he'd have something to show for it, instead of a basement full of people who hated him. But 2 weeks later, everything changed. Daniel was called upstairs to the operations department on the 42nd floor. A woman in a sharp business suit greeted him in a conference room. Daniel, I'm Director Phillips. I've reviewed your tracking system. The executive team believes it could revolutionize our internal logistics. She slid a folder across the table. We want to implement it company-wide, and we want you to oversee the rollout. You'd be promoted to junior analyst in operations, effective immediately. The salary is $65,000, full benefits, and you'd be working directly with our efficiency team. Daniel stared at the folder, not quite believing what he was hearing. I'd leave the mailroom. You'd leave the mailroom, she confirmed with a smile. You've proven that you're capable of much more than sorting packages. Mr. Westbrook himself approved this promotion when he heard what you'd accomplished. That evening, Daniel stood in the operations department on the 42nd floor, looking out the massive windows at the New York skyline. The view from up here was completely different from the basement. He could see for miles. But he also knew something important. The real challenge was just beginning. He was 17 years old, being promoted over people with college degrees and years of experience. He'd made enemies in the mailroom. And now he'd be making enemies up here too, Daniel pulled out his phone and texted his aunt. Got promoted today. You were wrong about the money. This was worth more. Her response came a minute later. Just 3 words. Prove me wrong. Daniel smiled. That was exactly what he planned to do. Daniel's first day in the operations. The department started with a meeting he wasn't invited to. He arrived at 8 in the morning to find his new coworkers gathered in the conference room. Door closed, voices muffled through the glass. When they finally emerged 20 minutes later, their expressions ranged from cold to hostile. His desk was in the corner, squeezed between a filing cabinet and a window. Someone had left a note taped to his computer monitor. Try not to break anything, kid? No signature. Daniel crumpled it up and got to work. The other analysts were all at least 5 years older than him. Most with business degrees from schools Daniel couldn't dream of affording. There was Kevin, who'd been waiting 3 years for a promotion. Melissa, who had an MBA from Cornell. Trevor, whose father had worked for Westbrook Enterprises for 20 years. They'd all paid their dues, worked their way up slowly, and now, here was this teenager from the mailroom, promoted over all of them. Daniel tried to be friendly at first. He'd offer to help with projects, ask questions to learn the systems, invite people to lunch. Kevin ignored him completely. Melissa gave him fake smiles and cold shoulders. Trevor was the worst, openly questioning Daniel's ideas in meetings, pointing out his lack of formal education, making jokes about mailroom solutions whenever Daniel contributed. But Daniel kept his head down and worked. He rebuilt his tracking system from scratch after the coffee incident destroyed his laptop. He stayed late every night, often the last person in the office, besides security. He knew he had to work twice as hard as everyone else, just to be considered half as good. 6 months into his new position, Daniel started noticing something odd. Documents related to a major development project kept crossing his desk, and the numbers didn't add up. The project was a $200 million deal to develop a commercial complex in Boston. It was Westbrook Enterprises' biggest venture of the year. But the environmental permits, which Daniel had to track as part of the logistics, seemed incomplete. He mentioned it casually to Trevor one day. Hey, I noticed the Boston project permits look like they're missing some signatures. Should I follow up on that? Trevor barely looked up from his computer. That's handled by Mitchell in compliance. Not your concern. Stay in your lane. Daniel let it go, but something nagged at him. He'd learned in the mailroom that missing signatures usually meant missing permits. And missing permits meant delays. Big, expensive delays. But Trevor was right. It wasn't his department. He had enough to worry about with people already resenting him. Then, on a Tuesday morning, everything exploded. Daniel arrived at work to find the entire executive floor in chaos. People were running between offices, phones were ringing non-stop, and he could hear Richard Westbrook's voice booming from the main conference room. Director Phillips found Daniel at his desk. Her face was pale. Conference room. Now. Everyone. The conference room was packed. Richard stood at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor completely gone. For those who haven't heard, Mitchell from compliance disappeared. Yesterday, vanished. And we've just discovered he's been embezzling funds for 8 months. Nearly $3 million gone. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Richard held up his hand for silence. It gets worse. The Boston project, our largest deal of the year, is scheduled to break ground in 48 hours. Mitchell was responsible for filing all the environmental permits. We've just learned that none of them were properly filed, not one. Without those permits, we can't break ground. If we don't break ground by Thursday's deadline, the entire deal collapses. We lose the $200 million investment. We face lawsuits from our partners. We'll likely have to lay off 300 employees. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard looked around at his senior executives. I need solutions. Who understands Mitchell's filing system? Who can fix this in 48 hours? Nobody spoke. The head of compliance shook his head. Mitchell kept everything compartmentalized. No one else in the department fully understood his process. It would take weeks just to figure out what needs to be filed, let alone actually file it. We don't have weeks. We have 48 hours. More silence. Daniel felt his heart pounding. He remembered those environmental permits from the mailroom, remembered delivering them, remembered reorganizing files when they'd been misfiled. He'd seen how the system worked, had even streamlined part of it during his tracking project. But he was just a junior analyst. Who was he to speak up in a room full of executives? His mother's voice echoed in his head. Sometimes courage isn't about being brave. It's about caring more about helping than about protecting yourself. Daniel raised his hand. Every head in the room turned to look at him. Trevor rolled his eyes. Kevin shook his head in disbelief. I might be able to help, Daniel said, his voice barely steady. I worked with environmental permits in the mailroom. I reorganized the filing system last year. I know the process. I know which agencies we need, and I know who to contact. Richard stared at him. You're 18 years old, and you've been in operations for 6 months. Yes, sir. But I spent 8 months in the mailroom handling these exact documents. I created a contact list for every regulatory office in the Northeast. I know it's not much, but it's more than starting from zero. The senior executives looked skeptical. One of them, a man named Harold, actually laughed. You want to bet a $200 million deal on a kid who used to deliver mail? Do we have a better option? Richard's question hung in the air. Nobody answered. He turned back to Daniel. If I put you on this, you'll need a team. You'll need resources. And if you fail, this company faces the worst crisis in its history. I understand, sir. Richard studied him for a long moment. Phillips, assign him a team. Daniel, you have 48 hours. Don't let me down. The next 48 hours were the longest of Daniel's life. Richard assigned him 3 people. Kevin, who clearly resented the assignment. A paralegal named Rita, who seemed terrified. And surprisingly, Trevor, who looked like he wanted to murder Daniel. They set up in a small conference room, surrounded by boxes of Mitchell's files. Daniel organized them quickly, his mailroom experience paying off. He divided the work. Kevin would handle calls to the state agencies. Rita would process the paperwork. Trevor would verify the legal requirements. And Daniel would coordinate everything. At first, it was a disaster. Kevin deliberately made calls during lunch hours when offices were closed, wasting precious time. Trevor kept pointing out regulations that didn't apply, trying to confuse the process. They wanted Daniel to fail. They wanted to prove he was just a lucky kid out of his depth. But Daniel didn't give up. When Kevin wasted time, Daniel made the calls himself, using the contacts he'd built during his mailroom days. When Trevor cited wrong regulations, Daniel double-checked everything, catching the mistakes. He worked through the night, surviving on coffee and determination. Rita was the turning point. At 2 a.m, she looked up from her paperwork. Why are you doing this? Why work this hard for a company that barely respects you? Daniel thought about it. Because people's jobs depend on it. 300 families. That's not about respect. That's about doing what's right. Something shifted in Rita's expression. She nodded and went back to work with new energy. Kevin, overhearing the conversation, got quieter, started actually helping instead of sabotaging. Even Trevor seemed slightly less hostile by Wednesday afternoon. They'd identified all the missing permits. By Wednesday night, they'd filed emergency applications with every necessary agency. Daniel called in every favor, contacted every clerk he'd befriended, explained the situation honestly. Most people wanted to help, but the bureaucracy was slow. Thursday morning, 6 hours before the deadline, they were still waiting on 3 critical approvals. Daniel was on his 5th cup of coffee, his eyes burning with exhaustion. The conference room had become their war room, covered in papers, empty takeout containers, and the desperate energy of people who'd given everything. Richard came in at noon. Status: 3 permits still pending, Daniel reported. We've done everything we can. It's up to the agencies now. Richard nodded slowly. I want you to know, regardless of the outcome, you've done exceptional work. All of you. At 1:30, the first approval came through. At 2:15, the second. At 3:45, with 15 minutes to spare, Daniel's phone rang. It was the final agency. The permits were approved. Daniel closed his eyes and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 days. We got them. All of them. The project can proceed. The room erupted. Rita actually hugged him. Kevin clapped him on the back. Even Trevor managed a grudging nod of respect. Richard stood in the doorway, a slight smile on his face, but the victory celebration was short-lived. That evening, Daniel was called to Richard's office. He expected praise, maybe another promotion. Instead, he found Director Phillips there with a serious expression. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said. "During the crisis investigation, some concerning information came to light. There are allegations that you've been taking credit for other people's work. Your supervisor from the mailroom filed a formal complaint, and several colleagues have provided supporting statements." Daniel felt like he'd been punched. "That's not true. There will be an investigation," Phillips continued. "Until it's resolved, you're suspended from your position." Daniel walked out of the building in shock. He'd just saved the company $200 million, and now he was being accused of fraud. Someone wanted him gone badly enough to lie. The question was, who? And more importantly, could he prove his innocence before his entire future was destroyed? Daniel sat in his aunt's apartment staring at the suspension letter. 3 days had passed since he'd been escorted out of the building. 3 days of silence, waiting for the investigation to conclude. His aunt had stopped saying, "I told you so," which somehow made it worse. Now she just looked at him with pity. His phone buzzed constantly with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. Former coworkers asking what happened. His school guidance counselor wondering why he'd missed classes. But Daniel couldn't focus on any of it. He'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now it was all falling apart because someone had lied about him. The worst part was not knowing who. Mr. Chen, from the mailroom, had filed a complaint, claiming Daniel had stolen credit for the tracking system that other workers had developed. But Daniel knew Mr. Chen was just the face of it. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who wanted him gone badly enough to fabricate evidence. On the 4th day, Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Daniel, it's Rita, from the permits team." She sounded nervous. "I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on 42nd Street? It's important." 20 minutes later, Daniel sat across from Rita in a corner booth. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," she said. "I know what's happening to you, and it's wrong. Trevor is behind it. He convinced Mr. Chen to file the complaint, and he's been getting other people to make false statements." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Trevor? Why?" "Because you made him look bad. He's been at the company for 5 years and never accomplished anything close to what you did in less than a year. His father is a senior executive, and Trevor's always coasted on that connection. But you actually earned everything through hard work." It threatened him. Rita slid a folder across the table. "I've been documenting everything. Emails Trevor sent, coordinating the false allegations, text messages where he bragged about getting you fired. I even have recordings of him pressuring Kevin to lie." Daniel opened the folder, his hands shaking. It was all there. Clear evidence of a conspiracy to destroy his reputation. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel asked. Rita smiled sadly. "Because that night, during the permits crisis, you said something that stuck with me. You said it wasn't about respect. It was about doing what's right. I haven't been doing what's right. None of us have. We've been so jealous and petty that we couldn't see we were destroying someone who never did anything except work hard and try to help." She stood up. "The investigation hearing is tomorrow at 10. I'll be there to testify. So will Kevin. We talked, and he's done being Trevor's puppet." The next morning, Daniel walked into the Westbrook Enterprises building for the first time in 4 days. Security looked uncomfortable as they checked his temporary badge. The hearing was in a conference room on the executive floor. Richard Westbrook sat at the head of the table. With Director Phillips, 2 people from legal, and the head of human resources, Trevor, was there too. Looking confident, Mr. Chen sat beside him, nervous and fidgeting. When Daniel entered, Trevor smirked. "Good of you to show up," Richard silenced him with a look. "Let's begin. Daniel, you've been accused of taking credit for work others performed, specifically the package tracking system developed during your time in the mailroom. Mr. Chen, please present your evidence." Mr. Chen cleared his throat and began reading from a prepared statement that was clearly written by someone else. He claimed that other mailroom workers had created the tracking system, that Daniel had simply stolen their work and presented it as his own. "Do you have any documentation of this other system?" One of the lawyers asked. Mr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. It was informal. Nothing written down. "So you have no evidence that anyone else created a tracking system?" "Well, no, but the door opened." Rita walked in, followed by Kevin. Trevor's confident expression cracked slightly. "We have evidence," Rita said firmly. She handed the folder to Director Phillips. Text messages, emails, and recordings that prove Trevor organized this false complaint as retaliation against Daniel. He pressured Mr. Chen and others to lie. Phillips opened the folder, her face growing darker as she read. She passed documents to Richard, who read them in silence. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Kevin spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. "I want to apologize. I let my jealousy convince me to go along with Trevor's scheme. But the truth is, Daniel never stole credit for anything. He created that tracking system himself, on his own time, and he saved this company millions of dollars. We resented him for being young and talented, but that doesn't make him a thief." Trevor stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of sit down." Richard's voice was ice cold. "I've heard enough." He looked at Mr. Chen. "You've been with this company for 8 years. Did you file a false complaint against an employee?" Mr. Chen looked like he might cry. Trevor said it would just be a warning that Daniel needed to be taught humility. "I didn't know it would go this far." "I'm sorry," Richard turned to Trevor. "And you orchestrated all of this because you felt threatened by a teenager who worked harder than you." Trevor's face flushed red. "My father will hear about this. Your father already has. He's the one who told me to handle this personally." Richard stood. "You're fired, effective immediately. Mr. Chen, you're demoted back to mailroom clerk. If you'd like to keep even that position, I suggest you use this as an opportunity to learn about integrity. As for you, all charges are dropped with our sincere apologies. Your position is reinstated, and we're offering you a promotion to Operations Director, overseeing the Efficiency and Innovation Department." Daniel couldn't speak. Operations Director, at 19 years old? It was impossible. "I don't expect an answer right now," Richard continued. "Take the weekend to think about it. But Daniel, you've proven something important. Character matters more than connections. Hard work matters more than privilege. Integrity matters more than anything else." 2 years later, Daniel stood in the same conference room where he'd almost lost everything. But this time, he wasn't defending himself. He was presenting the quarterly results for his department, which had increased company efficiency by 37% and saved $12 million. After the meeting, Richard asked him to stay behind. Catherine was with him, healthy and vibrant. "We wanted to talk to you about something personal," Richard said. Catherine smiled warmly. "I've been in remission for 18 months now. The doctors say I'm doing wonderfully. And I keep thinking about that day on the plane, how you gave me more time with my family, with my grandchildren, gave me the chance to see so much life. I'm so glad you're well," Daniel said sincerely. "We want to do something to honor that gift," Richard continued. "We're establishing a scholarship fund for young people from difficult circumstances who show exceptional character and determination. The Catherine and Richard Westbrook Second Chance Scholarship. We'd like you to help run it." Daniel felt tears prickling his eyes. "I'd be honored. There's one more thing," Catherine added. "We received an application that reminded us of you. A 16-year-old girl from Detroit who's been caring for her sick brother while maintaining straight A's and working 2 jobs. She wants to study engineering but has no money for college. She wrote that she doesn't want charity, just an opportunity to prove herself." Catherine handed Daniel the application. "Sound familiar?" Daniel read the girl's essay, seeing himself in every word. The determination, the pride, the desperate hope for just one chance. He looked up at Richard and Catherine. When can we meet her? Next week. We thought you should be the one to tell her she's our first recipient. That night, Daniel walked through Times Square, watching the crowds and lights. He thought about the scared, exhausted teenager who'd arrived in New York 2 years ago with nothing but a backpack and a prayer. He thought about his mother and the lessons she'd taught him. He thought about the moment on that plane when he'd made a choice to act instead of freeze. Everything had spiraled out from that single decision. Saving Catherine's life had led to meeting Richard. Asking for opportunity instead of money had led to the mailroom. Working harder than everyone else had led to promotions. Standing up for truth during the investigation had led to respect. And now he had the chance to give someone else what had been given to him. A second chance. Daniel pulled out his phone and called his aunt. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," he said. "Remember when you told me I was crazy for turning down that money?" "Don't rub it in," she grumbled, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm not rubbing it in. I'm calling to say thank you for taking me in when you didn't have to. For pushing me even when you thought I was wrong. You gave me a place to land so I could figure out how to fly." There was a long pause. Then softly, "You did that yourself, kiddo. I just provided the couch." "Best couch I ever slept on," Daniel said, and meant it. The next week, Daniel met the girl from Detroit. Her name was Zara, and she sat in the conference room with the same nervous hope he'd felt 2 years ago. When he told her about the scholarship, she cried. When he told her the amount would cover not just tuition, but housing and living expenses, she couldn't speak. "There's one condition," Daniel said gently. "When you succeed, and you will succeed, you have to promise to help someone else the way we're helping you. Pass it forward. That's how we change the world, one opportunity at a time." Zara nodded, wiping her eyes. "I promise." As Daniel walked her out of the building, he saw his reflection in the glass walls, not the scared teenager anymore, but someone who'd earned his place through determination, integrity, and the willingness to work for what he wanted instead of waiting for it to be given. The plane that day had been heading to New York, but Daniel realized now that it had really been heading here, to this moment, to this purpose. Saving Catherine's life had saved his own in ways he never could have imagined. And the best part? The story wasn't over. It was just beginning again, with a new chapter, a new person, and another chance to prove that character and courage still mattered in a world that often forgot to value them. Daniel smiled and headed home, ready for whatever came next.